Millionaire rescues poor woman to care for sick son, the shocking secret she's hiding. Alexander Rothschild stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse apartment, gazing out at the glittering New York City skyline. At 45, he was the epitome of success. CEO of Rothschild Investments, a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund he had built from the ground up. His sharp features, expertly tailored suit, and confident demeanor spoke of a man accustomed to power and control. But as he turned away from the view, his eyes fell on a framed photograph on his desk, and his carefully constructed facade crumbled. The photo showed a smiling woman holding a baby boy, both of them beaming at the camera. Sarah, his late wife, and their son, Ethan, now 7 years old and fighting a rare genetic disorder. Born into old money, Alexander had always been driven to prove himself beyond his family name. He had excelled at every elite institution he attended, from prep school to Harvard Business School. His ruthless business acumen had turned his family's modest fortune into an empire, earning him the nickname the Wolf of Wall Street 2.0. But for all his professional triumphs, Alexander's personal life told a different story. Sarah's death during childbirth had left him a single father, struggling to balance his growing empire with the needs of his newborn son. When Ethan was diagnosed with Hutchinson-Gilford progeria syndrome at the age of 2, Alexander's world had tilted on its axis. The past 5 years had been a blur of hospitals, experimental treatments, and a revolving door of nurses and caregivers. Alexander had thrown his considerable resources into finding a cure, but so far, every promising lead had ended in disappointment. Ethan's condition continued to deteriorate, his body aging at an alarming rate, while his mind remained that of a child. The stress had taken its toll on Alexander. The man who once dominated boardrooms with his charisma and sharp wit had become reclusive and short-tempered. His relationships with friends and family had become strained, his sole focus narrowed to his son's survival and his company's success. As night fell over the city, Alexander's thoughts turned to the new nurse he had hired for Ethan. Jessica Chen, a young woman he had quite literally picked up off the streets. It had been an impulsive decision, one that his advisors had strongly cautioned against. But there had been something in Jessica's eyes, a mix of desperation and determination, that had resonated with Alexander. Little did he know that this decision, made in a moment of uncharacteristic compassion, would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, trust, and the true meaning of wealth. The journey ahead would force Alexander to confront his own demons and rediscover the man he used to be, before grief and ambition had hardened his heart. The day that would change everything started like any other for Alexander Rothschild. He woke at dawn, checked on Ethan, who was still sleeping peacefully, and then immersed himself in work. By mid-morning, he was deep in a conference call with investors when his personal assistant, Michael, interrupted with an urgent message. "Sir, there's a situation downstairs," Michael said, his voice tense. "Security has detained a young woman who is trying to sleep in the lobby. She's causing quite a scene." Alexander frowned, irritated by the interruption. "Have them remove her," he said curtly, ready to return to his call. But Michael hesitated. "Sir, she's claiming to be a nurse, says she has an interview with you." This caught Alexander's attention. He had been searching for a new nurse for Ethan after the last one had quit, unable to handle the emotional toll of caring for a terminally ill child. "I'll be right down," he said, ending the call abruptly. In the lobby, Alexander found a chaotic scene. A young woman, no older than her mid-20s, was engaged in a heated argument with 2 security guards. Her clothes were worn and dirty, her long dark hair tangled, but there was a fire in her eyes that gave Alexander pause. "Miss," he said, his authoritative voice cutting through the commotion. "I'm Alexander Rothschild. I understand you claim to have an interview with me?" The woman turned to him, her chin lifted defiantly. "Yes, I do. I'm Jessica Chen. I sent my resume last week and received an email confirming an interview for today." Alexander studied her skeptically. It was hard to reconcile this disheveled young woman with the polished resume he vaguely remembered reviewing. "And you thought it appropriate to sleep in my lobby?" Jessica's defiance faltered for a moment, replaced by a flicker of shame. I lost my apartment last week. I didn't want to risk being late for the interview. It won't happen again, I promise." There was something in her voice, a mix of desperation and determination, that struck a chord with Alexander. Against his better judgment, he found himself saying, "Come up to my office. We'll have that interview now." As they rode the elevator in tense silence, Alexander's mind raced. This was madness. He should send this girl away, have his assistant find more suitable candidates. But when he looked at Jessica, he saw a reflection of his younger self, hungry, driven, willing to do whatever it took to succeed. In his office, Jessica's story unfolded. She had graduated top of her class from nursing school, but a series of personal setbacks, a sick mother, mounting medical bills, had left her homeless. Despite her circumstances, she had continued to volunteer at local clinics, determined to keep her skills sharp and her nursing license active. "I know how this looks," Jessica said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "But I'm a damn good nurse, Mr. Rothschild. If you give me a chance, I promise I won't let you down." Alexander was torn. Every logical part of his brain was screaming that this was a terrible idea. But as he looked at Jessica, he saw not just a desperate young woman, but a potential lifeline for Ethan. Someone who understood struggle, who had faced adversity and refused to give up. Wasn't that exactly the kind of person he wanted caring for his son? The job comes with living quarters. He heard himself saying, "You'd be expected to be on call 24/7. My son's condition is challenging. It's not an easy job." Jessica's eyes widened with hope. "I understand. I'm ready for the challenge, sir. I won't let you down." Alexander made his decision in that moment, ignoring the voice of caution in his head. "You start today. Michael will show you to your room and provide you with new clothes. Get cleaned up, and then we'll introduce you to Ethan." As Jessica left the office, practically vibrating with gratitude and nervous energy, Alexander sank into his chair. What had he just done? Hiring a homeless woman to care for his critically ill son? It was madness. Yet, as he thought of Jessica's determination, her resilience in the face of overwhelming odds, he felt a glimmer of hope he hadn't experienced in years. Perhaps this unconventional decision was exactly what he and Ethan needed. Little did Alexander know that this impulsive act of compassion would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about trust, love, and the true meaning of family. The journey ahead would force him to confront his own prejudices and rediscover the man he used to be before grief and ambition had hardened his heart. In the weeks following Jessica's unexpected hiring, Alexander found himself pleasantly surprised by the positive changes in his household. Ethan, who had grown withdrawn and sullen with his revolving door of caretakers, seemed to blossom under Jessica's care. Her energy and compassion brought a warmth to the penthouse that had been missing since Sarah's death. Alexander, who had initially kept a wary eye on Jessica, found himself gradually relaxing his guard. He installed a state-of-the-art baby monitor in Ethan's room, ostensibly for medical monitoring, but partly to assuage his lingering doubts about Jessica's trustworthiness. It was a month into Jessica's employment when the revelation occurred. Alexander was working late in his home office, half listening to the gentle murmur of voices from Ethan's room through the monitor. Suddenly, he heard something that made him freeze. "Tell me about Mom again," Ethan's voice came through clearly. Alexander's hand hovered over the mouse, his breath caught in his throat. He had always struggled to talk about Sarah with Ethan, the pain still too raw even after all these years. "Well," Jessica's voice was soft, gentle. "I didn't know your mom, but from what your dad has told me, she was an amazing woman. She had a smile that could light up a room, and she loved you more than anything in the world." Alexander felt a lump form in his throat. He had never told Jessica these things about Sarah. How could she know? "She had long blonde hair, right?" Ethan asked. "That's right," Jessica confirmed. "And green eyes, just like yours. Your dad says you have her laugh too." As Alexander listened, tears forming in his eyes, Jessica continued to paint a vivid picture of Sarah. Her love of sunflowers, her terrible cooking skills, her passion for helping others. Every detail was spot on, yet Alexander knew he had never shared these intimate details with Jessica. His mind raced. How was this possible? Had Jessica somehow accessed private information about Sarah? Was this all an elaborate con? But as he continued to listen, Another possibility began to form in his mind, one that seemed even more impossible. The way Jessica spoke about Sarah, the intimate details she knew, the love in her voice, it was as if Sarah herself was speaking through Jessica. Alexander's rational mind rebelled against the idea. He was a man of logic, of hard facts and figures. The idea of any sort of supernatural explanation was absurd. And yet, he thought back to the day he had met Jessica, the inexplicable pull he had felt towards her despite all logic. The way Ethan had taken to her immediately, as if he somehow recognized her. The warmth and light she had brought back into their lives, so reminiscent of Sarah. As the realization washed over him, Alexander felt a mix of emotions he couldn't begin to untangle. Fear, hope, disbelief, and a profound sense of awe. Could it be possible? Had Sarah somehow found a way to come back to them, to take care of the son she had never had the chance to know? The implications were staggering. If this was true, it meant that everything Alexander thought he knew about the world, about life and death, was wrong. It meant that the woman he had hired on an impulse, the homeless girl he had rescued from his lobby, might be so much more than she appeared. As Jessica's voice continued to weave stories of Sarah for Ethan, Alexander sat frozen in his chair, his world tilted on its axis. He knew that what he did next would change everything. The question was he ready to accept a truth that defied all logic and reason? And if he did, what would it mean for him, for Ethan, and for the young woman who had unexpectedly become the heart of their broken little family? Alexander sat in his office long into the night, the gentle murmur of Jessica's voice through the baby monitor a constant backdrop to his tumultuous thoughts. The revelation that Jessica might somehow be channeling Sarah, or perhaps even be Sarah in some inexplicable way, had shaken him to his core. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, Alexander made a decision. He would not confront Jessica directly, not yet. Instead, he would observe, gather more evidence, and try to understand what was really happening. It was the logical approach, the one that aligned with his analytical nature. But even as he made this decision, a part of him knew it was also driven by fear. Fear of being wrong, of losing the newfound warmth in his home, and perhaps most terrifyingly, of it all being true. The consequences of this decision rippled through the following weeks. Alexander found himself hyper-aware of every interaction between Jessica and Ethan. He began to notice things he had overlooked before. The way Jessica anticipated Ethan's needs before he voiced them, her innate understanding of his medical condition that went beyond her nursing training, the little gestures and expressions that were hauntingly reminiscent of Sarah. His behavior didn't go unnoticed. Jessica began to shoot him questioning glances when she caught him staring. Ethan, perceptive despite his illness, asked why Daddy was acting weird. Even Michael, his usually unflappable assistant, commented on his distraction during meetings. Alexander's work began to suffer. He found himself unable to focus on spreadsheets and market trends when his mind was consumed with questions of the supernatural. He canceled meetings, delegated important decisions, and spent hours poring over books on reincarnation and near-death experiences, subjects he would have scoffed at just weeks ago. His neglect of the business did not go unnoticed by the board of directors. Rumors began to circulate about his mental state, and there were whispers of a potential vote of no confidence. The empire he had spent his life building was beginning to crumble, all because of his obsession with uncovering the truth about Jessica. At home, the atmosphere grew tense. Alexander's constant presence and watchful eye began to make Jessica uncomfortable. She became more guarded in her interactions with Ethan, especially when Alexander was around. The easy warmth that had characterized their household in the first weeks of Jessica's employment gave way to an uneasy tension. Ethan, sensitive to the changing dynamics, began to withdraw. His health, which had shown signs of improvement under Jessica's care, began to decline again. He complained of fatigue and loss of appetite, symptoms that sent Alexander into a panic. One night, about a month into his covert observation, Alexander overheard a conversation that brought everything to a head. Through the baby monitor, he heard Ethan's weak voice. "Miss Jessica, is Daddy mad at us?" Jessica's reply was soft, filled with a sadness that made Alexander's heart clench. "No, sweetheart, your daddy's just..." going through some things. He loves you very much. But he looks at you funny, like he's scared. Are you going to leave like the others? There was a long pause before Jessica answered, her voice thick with emotion. I'm not going anywhere, Ethan. I promise, no matter what. The raw honesty in her voice, so reminiscent of Sarah's unwavering devotion, broke something open in Alexander. He realized that, in his obsession with uncovering the mystery of Jessica's connection to Sarah, he had been neglecting the living, breathing people who needed him, his son, and the woman who had brought light back into their lives, regardless of who or what she might be. In that moment, Alexander made a new decision. He would stop his covert investigation. He would embrace the joy and healing that Jessica had brought into their lives, without trying to explain or rationalize it. And most importantly, he would be present for his son, in a way he hadn't been since Sarah's death. The consequences of this new decision were immediate and far-reaching. The next morning, Alexander called an emergency board meeting. He announced that he would be taking a step back from day-to-day operations to focus on his family, appointing his trusted CFO as interim CEO. The news was met with surprise but also relief. Many had feared a total breakdown, and this seemed like a positive step. At home, Alexander made a conscious effort to rebuild the easy rapport with Jessica that had characterized her early days with them. He joined her and Ethan for meals, for story time, for the small moments of domestic life he had been missing. He watched with wonder as Ethan's eyes regained their spark, as color returned to his cheeks. And with Jessica, Alexander allowed himself to open up. He shared stories of Sarah, of their life together, of his fears and hopes for Ethan. He didn't mention his suspicions about her connection to Sarah, but he felt a weight lift from his shoulders as he let go of his need to understand and control everything. As the weeks passed, Alexander felt a shift in himself. The hard edges of the ruthless businessman began to soften. He found himself smiling more, laughing at Ethan's jokes, appreciating the simple joys of family life that he had forgotten. But even as peace settled over the Rothschild household, Alexander knew that the story was far from over. The mystery of Jessica's connection to Sarah still lingered in the back of his mind, a puzzle he had chosen to set aside but couldn't entirely forget. This decision to embrace the present and let go of his need for answers had profound effects on Alexander's life. His relationship with Ethan blossomed as he became more involved in his son's daily life. He found himself looking forward to their evening routines, reading bedtime stories, discussing Ethan's day, and simply being present in a way he hadn't been since Sarah's death. Jessica, no longer under Alexander's constant scrutiny, seemed to relax and open up more. She shared stories of her own life, her struggles, her dreams, her journey to becoming a nurse. Alexander found himself drawn to her resilience and compassion, seeing her not as a mystery to be solved, but as a remarkable person in her own right. The change in Alexander didn't go unnoticed by those around him. His sister, Rachel, who had been estranged from him for years due to his obsession with work, reached out after hearing about his step back from the company. Their cautious reconnection brought a new dimension to Alexander's life, reminding him of the importance of family beyond just Ethan. At work, the interim CEO managed to steady the ship, even implementing some of the more humanitarian policies that Alexander had been considering but never prioritized. The company's image began to shift from that of a cutthroat Wall Street firm to a more socially responsible institution. However, not all consequences of Alexander's decision were positive. Some of his old business associates, seeing his new family-focused approach as weakness, began to make moves against his company. There were attempts at hostile takeovers, manipulations of stock prices, and whisper campaigns questioning his competence. Alexander found himself torn between his desire to protect the company he had built and his commitment to his new priorities. There were nights when he sat up late, poring over financial reports and strategizing, only to be found by Jessica in the morning, asleep at his desk. "You can't pour from an empty cup, Alex," she told him gently one such morning, using the nickname that only Sarah had used before. The familiar term of endearment, coming from Jessica, sent a jolt through Alexander, reigniting his questions about her true nature. But even as these external pressures mounted, Alexander found an inner strength he didn't know he possessed. The love and support of Ethan and Jessica grounded him, helping him navigate the challenges with a clarity and calmness that surprised even him. Perhaps the most significant consequence of Alexander's decision was the change in Ethan's condition. While the disease itself was incurable, Ethan's quality of life improved dramatically. His spirits lifted, he engaged more with his treatments, and his doctors noted a slowdown in the progression of his symptoms. Dr. Patel, Ethan's longtime physician, was amazed at the change. "I've never seen anything like it," he told Alexander during a checkup. "It's as if Ethan's will to live has somehow strengthened his body's ability to fight the disease. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." These words filled Alexander with a mix of joy and trepidation. Joy at the improvement in Ethan's condition, but trepidation at the implication. If love and emotional well-being could have such a profound effect on Ethan's health, what did that mean for the mysterious connection he sensed between Jessica and Sarah? Could the power of that connection be contributing to Ethan's improvement? As Alexander wrestled with these thoughts, he found himself at a crossroads. His decision to embrace the present had brought unexpected joy and healing to his family. But the unanswered questions about Jessica still tugged at him, promising answers that could potentially change everything. The consequences of his initial decision had reshaped his world in ways he could never have anticipated. Now, he faced a new choice: continue on this path of acceptance and presence, or delve back into the mystery that could unravel everything they had built. As he watched Jessica and Ethan laughing together over a board game, their faces alight with joy, Alexander felt the weight of this decision. The path forward was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The life he had now, imperfect and mysterious as it was more fulfilling than anything he had known before. Whatever he decided, he knew he would never go back to the man he had been before Jessica entered their lives. As Alexander grappled with the changes in his personal life, a secondary plot began to unfold at Rothschild Investments. Marcus Green, the interim CEO appointed by Alexander, found himself navigating treacherous waters as he attempted to steer the company in a new direction. Marcus had always been more inclined towards socially responsible investing, but had kept these views largely to himself in the cutthroat world of Wall Street. Now, with Alexander's blessing and surprising new outlook, Marcus saw an opportunity to reshape the company's ethos. He began by implementing a series of initiatives aimed at improving the company's social and environmental impact. This included divesting from fossil fuels, increasing investments in renewable energy and sustainable technologies, and establishing a substantial fund for microloans to small businesses in underprivileged communities. These moves were met with mixed reactions. Some board members and investors embraced the new direction, seeing it as a forward-thinking approach that would position the company well for the future. Others, however, were furious, viewing it as a betrayal of the profit-at-all-costs mentality that had made Rothschild Investments a powerhouse. One of the most vocal opponents was Victor Crane, a longtime board member and old friend of Alexander's father. Victor saw Marcus's actions as a direct threat to the company's bottom line and his own considerable investments. He began to rally other dissatisfied board members and investors, plotting to oust Marcus and return the company to its old ways. As tensions rose within the company, Marcus found an unexpected ally in Rachel, Alexander's sister. Rachel, an environmental lawyer, had long been critical of Rothschild Investments' practices. Intrigued by the changes she was hearing about, she reached out to Marcus, offering her expertise and support. Their collaboration proved fruitful. Rachel's legal knowledge helped navigate the complex regulatory landscape of socially responsible investing, while her connections in the environmental sector opened doors to new, promising investment opportunities. However, their growing closeness did not go unnoticed. Victor and his allies began to spread rumors of impropriety, suggesting that Marcus was being unduly influenced by the Rothschild family to push an agenda that wasn't in the company's best interests. The situation came to a head when Victor called for an emergency board meeting to vote on Marcus's continued leadership. The night before the meeting, Marcus found himself in Alexander's home office, laying out the situation. "I don't know what to do, Alex," Marcus admitted, running a hand through his graying hair. Everything we've worked for is at risk. Maybe I pushed too hard, too fast. Alexander, who had been listening intently, was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you believe in what you're doing, Marcus? Do you truly think this is the right direction for the company?" Marcus nodded without hesitation. "I do. It's not just about profits anymore. We have the power to make a real difference in the world." A slow smile spread across Alexander's face. "Then we fight," he said simply. As they began to strategize late into the night, neither man noticed Jessica standing in the doorway, a thoughtful expression on her face. She slipped away quietly, an idea forming in her mind. The secondary plot of corporate intrigue and moral reckoning served to mirror Alexander's personal journey. Just as he was learning to balance his drive for success with a newfound appreciation for family and compassion, his company was undergoing a similar transformation. The outcome of this corporate struggle would have far-reaching consequences, not just for Rothschild Investments, but for Alexander's own path forward. As the lines between his personal and professional lives blurred, Alexander found himself once again at the center of a storm that would test his new values and resolve. Little did he know that Jessica, the catalyst for so much change in his personal life, was about to play an unexpected role in this corporate drama as well. As the corporate drama unfolded in the background, the relationships within the Rothschild household continued to evolve in complex and often surprising ways. The dynamic between Alexander, Jessica, and Ethan had settled into a comfortable rhythm, but it was far from static. Alexander found himself increasingly drawn to Jessica, not just for her uncanny connection to Sarah, but for who she was as an individual. Her strength, compassion, and unwavering dedication to Ethan moved him deeply. He began to look forward to their evening conversations after Ethan had gone to bed, where they would discuss everything from philosophy to their hopes for the future. One such evening, as they sat on the balcony overlooking the city, Jessica turned to Alexander with a serious expression. "Alex," she said softly, using the nickname that still sent a thrill through him, "I need to tell you something." Alexander's heart raced, wondering if she was finally going to address the mysterious connection he had sensed. But Jessica's next words took him by surprise. "I've been taking online courses," she said, a mix of pride and nervousness in her voice. "I want to become a pediatric specialist, to be able to help kids like Ethan even more." The pride that swelled in Alexander's chest caught him off guard. He realized in that moment that he had come to care for Jessica deeply, not as a replacement for Sarah or a mystical connection to his past, but as a person in her own right. "That's wonderful, Jessica," he said warmly, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "I'll support you in whatever way I can." The smile that lit up Jessica's face was dazzling, and Alexander felt something shift between them. The possibility of a future together, something he had not allowed himself to consider since Sarah's death, suddenly seemed within reach. However, their growing closeness did not go unnoticed by Ethan. The perceptive child began to show signs of jealousy, demanding more of Jessica's attention and becoming clingier with Alexander. It was clear that the idea of sharing the two most important people in his life was difficult for him to process. One night, after a particularly trying day, where Ethan had thrown a tantrum over Jessica spending time helping Alexander with some paperwork, they decided to address the issue head-on. "Ethan," Alexander said gently, sitting on the edge of his son's bed, "you know that Jessica and I care about you more than anything in the world, right?" Ethan nodded sullenly, his eyes darting between Alexander and Jessica, who stood nearby. "And you know that nothing will ever change that?" Jessica added, moving to sit on Ethan's other side. "But what if you love each other more than me?" Ethan's voice was small, vulnerable in a way that broke both adults' hearts. Alexander and Jessica exchanged a look over Ethan's head, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them. "Oh, sweetheart," Jessica said, pulling Ethan into a hug. "Love doesn't work like that. It's not a finite resource. Loving your dad doesn't mean I love you any less. And if Jessica and I care about each other," Alexander added, joining the hug, "it just means our family gets bigger and stronger. There's more love to go around, not less." As Ethan slowly relaxed in their embrace, Alexander felt a sense of rightness settle over him. This was his family, unconventional as it might be, and he would do anything to protect it. The incident served to bring them all closer together. Ethan, reassured of his place in both Alexander and Jessica's hearts, became more accepting of their relationship. He even began to express excitement at the idea of Jessica becoming a real part of their family. As for Alexander and Jessica, the acknowledgement of their feelings, albeit indirectly, opened up new avenues in their relationship. They began to allow themselves to imagine a future together, not just as caregivers to Ethan, but as partners in life. However, the shadow of Sarah's memory and the unresolved questions about Jessica's connection to her still loomed. Alexander found himself torn between his growing feelings for Jessica as an individual and his lingering suspicions about her true nature. Jessica, for her part, seemed to sense Alexander's inner conflict. There were moments when she would look at him with an expression that seemed to hold secrets, as if she was on the verge of revealing something important. But always, at the last moment, she would pull back, leaving Alexander to wonder what remained unsaid between them. As their relationships deepened and intertwined, all three members of this unusual family unit found themselves on the brink of a transformation. The love that had brought them together was undeniable, but the mysteries that surrounded them threatened to unravel everything they had built. The stage was set for a confrontation that would force them all to face the truths they had been avoiding and to decide what they truly meant to each other. The bond between them would be tested in ways they could never have anticipated, leading to a climactic event that would change their lives forever. The day that would change everything dawned bright and clear. Alexander woke early, his mind already racing with thoughts of the upcoming board meeting where the fate of Rothschild investments would be decided. As he made his way to the kitchen for his morning coffee, he was surprised to find Jessica already up, poring over what looked like medical journals. "Big day?" she asked, looking up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Alexander nodded, struck by the tension he sensed in her. "Jessica, is everything all right?" Before she could answer, Ethan's voice called out from his room, sounding strained and frightened. "Dad, Jessica, something's wrong." They rushed to Ethan's room to find him curled up in bed, his face pale and contorted with pain. "It hurts," he whimpered, clutching his chest. The next few hours passed in a blur of ambulance sirens, hospital corridors, and terse conversations with doctors. Ethan's condition, which had been stable for months, had suddenly deteriorated. He was rushed into emergency surgery, leaving Alexander and Jessica to wait in agonizing silence. As they sat in the sterile waiting room, Alexander felt as if his world was crumbling around him. The board meeting, which had seemed so important just hours ago, now felt trivial in comparison to his son's life hanging in the balance. It was in this moment of crisis that Jessica made a decision that would change everything. She turned to Alexander, her eyes filled with a mix of determination and fear. "Alex," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Alexander felt his heart rate quicken. Was this finally the moment when all his questions would be answered? Jessica took a deep breath. I'm not who you think I am. The night you found me, the night you took me in, it wasn't a coincidence." She went on to explain, her words tumbling out in a rush, that she had sought Alexander out deliberately. She had been a promising medical student, specializing in the same rare genetic disorder that afflicted Ethan. But a series of personal tragedies had derailed her career, leaving her homeless and desperate. "I had read about Ethan's case," she confessed. I thought if I could help him, it might be my chance to get back on track, to make a difference." Alexander listened in stunned silence as Jessica revealed how she had orchestrated their meeting, how she had researched Sarah extensively to build a connection with Ethan. "But Alex," she said, tears now streaming down her face, "what I never expected was to fall in love. With Ethan. With you. With this family we've built. I'm so sorry for the deception, but everything else, every moment, every feeling, it's all been real." As the weight of Jessica's confession settled over them, a doctor emerged from the operating room. The news was grim. Ethan's condition was critical. He needed a highly specialized treatment, one that was experimental and not yet approved. There's only one doctor in the country who can perform this procedure, the surgeon explained. Dr. Sarah Winters. At the mention of the name, both Alexander and Jessica froze. Sarah. The name of Alexander's late wife. The woman Jessica had seemingly channeled for months. In that moment, as the truth of Jessica's deception collided with the desperate need to save Ethan, Alexander found himself at a crossroads. The decision he would make in the next few moments would determine not just Ethan's fate, but the future of their unconventional family. As he looked at Jessica, seeing both the woman he had come to love and the web of lies that had brought her into their lives, Alexander knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The hospital waiting room seemed to shrink around Alexander as he grappled with the weight of Jessica's confession and the dire news about Ethan's condition. The dual shocks left him reeling, torn between anger at Jessica's deception and desperate hope for his son's survival. For a long moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then Alexander spoke, his voice low and controlled. "You lied to me. To us. All this time." Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I did, and I'm more sorry than I can ever express. But Alex, everything that matters, my love for Ethan, my feelings for you, that's all real." Alexander ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. Part of him wanted to lash out, to send Jessica away and never see her again. But a larger part knew that right now, Ethan needed them both. And despite everything, he couldn't deny the connection they had formed. "We don't have time for this right now," he said finally. "Ethan needs us. We need to find this Dr. Winters." Jessica's eyes widened. "Dr. Sarah Winters. Alex, you don't think." "I don't know what to think anymore," Alexander cut her off. "But if there's even a chance she can save Ethan, we have to try." They sprang into action. Alexander made calls, pulling every string he could to locate Dr. Winters. Jessica pored over Ethan's medical files, preparing to brief the doctor on his condition. Despite the tension between them, they worked in tandem, their shared goal superseding their personal conflict. Hours passed in a blur of phone calls, medical jargon, and anxious waiting. Finally, a breakthrough came. Dr. Sarah Winters was located at a research facility on the other side of the country. She agreed to fly in immediately, but warned that time was of the essence. As they waited for Dr. Winters to arrive, Alexander and Jessica found themselves alone in the hospital's chapel, both too wired to sit still in the waiting room. "I need to understand," Alexander said quietly. "Why go to such lengths? Why not just apply for the job honestly?" Jessica sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I was desperate, Alex. My mother's medical bills had bankrupted me. I'd lost my scholarship. I saw Ethan's case in a medical journal, and I just knew I could help. But I also knew that a homeless girl with an incomplete degree wouldn't even get an interview. So I created a persona I thought you'd accept." "By pretending to channel my dead wife?" Alexander's voice was sharp with disbelief. "No." Jessica's eyes widened. That wasn't part of the plan. I researched Sarah, yes, to understand the family dynamic. But Alex, I swear to you, I never intended to make you think I had some supernatural connection to her. That was all you." Alexander felt as if the ground was shifting beneath his feet. Had he really projected his grief and longing onto Jessica so strongly that he'd invented a mystical connection? Before he could respond, a commotion in the hallway caught their attention. Dr. Sarah Winters had arrived. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Dr. Winters, a tall, imposing woman with streaks of gray in her dark hair, quickly took charge. She reviewed Ethan's case, consulted with the other doctors, and prepared for the experimental procedure. Throughout it all, Alexander and Jessica worked alongside her, their personal conflict temporarily set aside in their shared concern for Ethan. Dr. Winters raised an eyebrow at their obvious tension, but said nothing, her focus entirely on saving her young patient. As Ethan was wheeled into surgery, Alexander and Jessica found themselves alone once again. The adrenaline of the past few hours faded, leaving them both exhausted and emotionally raw. "What happens now?" Jessica asked softly. "After this is over, where do we go from here?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was tired but resolute. "I don't know, Jessica. You've given me every reason not to trust you, but you've also been there for Ethan in ways I never could have managed alone. You've brought light back into our lives. I can't just ignore that." He turned to face her fully. "If Ethan pulls through this, we'll figure it out, together. But I need complete honesty from you from now on. No more lies, no more secrets. Can you do that?" Jessica nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, absolutely yes. I promise, Alex, no more lies." As they settled in for the long wait, an uneasy truce formed between them. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with hurt and mistrust to overcome. But as they sat side by side, united in their love for Ethan and the fragile hope for his recovery, both Alexander and Jessica felt the first stirrings of possibility. They had weathered the storm of revelations and betrayal. Now, as Dr. Winters fought to save Ethan's life, they faced the daunting task of rebuilding their relationship on a foundation of truth. It wouldn't be easy, but as they clasped hands in the quiet of the waiting room, they silently vowed to try. The conflict wasn't fully resolved. There were still hurts to heal, trust to rebuild, and a family dynamic to redefine. But in choosing to face these challenges together, Alexander and Jessica had taken the first step towards a resolution that could, in time, lead to something stronger and more genuine than what they had built on deception. As the hours ticked by, with Ethan's fate hanging in the balance, they clung to this fragile hope for a new beginning. Whatever the outcome of the surgery, they knew that their lives had been irrevocably changed. The only question that remained was whether they could forge a new path forward, one built on honesty, forgiveness, and the love that, despite everything, still bound them together. The hours of Ethan's surgery stretched on interminably. Alexander and Jessica remained in the waiting room, exhausted but unable to rest. The tension between them had eased somewhat following their conversation, replaced by a shared anxiety for Ethan's well-being. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Dr. Winters emerged from the operating room. Her face was drawn with fatigue, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "He made it through the surgery," she announced, and Alexander felt his knees go weak with relief. "The next 24 hours will be critical, but I'm cautiously optimistic." As Dr. Winters explained the details of Ethan's condition and the road to recovery ahead, Alexander felt a shift within himself. The fear and anger that had consumed him earlier began to recede, replaced by a profound gratitude for Dr. Winters' skill, for Ethan's resilience, and yes, even for Jessica's presence through it all. When they were finally allowed to see Ethan, pale and small in his hospital bed but breathing steadily, Alexander made a decision that would set them all on a new path. "Jessica," he said softly, his eyes never leaving Ethan's face, "I want you to finish your medical degree." Jessica looked at him in surprise. "What?" Alexander turned to her, his expression serious but kind. "You have a gift. The way you've cared for Ethan, the knowledge you brought to his case, it shouldn't go to waste. I'll cover the costs. Consider it a fresh start for all of us." Tears welled up in Jessica's eyes. "Alex, I don't know what to say. After everything." "We can't change the past," Alexander said, reaching out to take her hand. "But we can shape our future. Ethan's future. I think this is the right path forward." This moment marked a turning point for all of them. Alexander's decision to support Jessica's education wasn't just about her career. It was a step towards forgiveness, towards building something new from the ashes of deception. For Jessica, it was a chance at redemption, an opportunity to become the person she had always aspired to be, not through lies, but through hard work and genuine care. And for Ethan, though he was unaware of it as he lay recovering, it meant a future with two people committed not just to his health, but to creating an honest, loving family environment for him to grow in. As they stood by Ethan's bedside, hands clasped and hearts full of cautious hope, Alexander and Jessica silently committed to this new direction. The road ahead would not be easy. There was trust to rebuild, wounds to heal, and a precarious family dynamic to navigate. But in choosing to move forward together, they had taken the first step towards a future brighter than either of them had dared to imagine. As the first light of dawn broke through the hospital window, it seemed to herald not just a new day, but a new chapter in their shared story. In the weeks following Ethan's surgery, as he slowly regained his strength, Alexander found himself in a period of profound reflection and personal growth. The man who had once measured his worth by his business acumen and wealth was learning to value different metrics of success. He watched with a mixture of pride and amazement as Jessica threw herself into her studies, balancing her coursework with Ethan's care in a way that left him in awe. Her dedication and genuine passion for medicine reinforced his belief that supporting her education had been the right decision. One evening, as they sat in Ethan's hospital room while he slept, Alexander turned to Jessica. "I owe you an apology," he said softly. Jessica looked at him in surprise. "You? But I'm the one who..." Alexander held up a hand to stop her. "Yes, you deceived me initially, but I'm the one who built up this fantasy about you channeling Sarah. I was so desperate to hold on to her memory that I projected all these expectations onto you. That wasn't fair." As he spoke, Alexander realized the truth of his words. He had been clinging to the past, to the memory of Sarah, so tightly that he had almost missed the chance for a new kind of happiness. Jessica reached out and took his hand. "We both made mistakes, Alex. But look at where we are now. Look at Ethan." They both turned to gaze at the sleeping boy, his color improving daily, his prognosis more hopeful than it had ever been. "I think," Jessica continued carefully, "that sometimes life gives us second chances in ways we don't expect. This isn't the family either of us imagined, but it's ours. And I'm grateful for it, complications and all." Alexander nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. He had spent so long trying to recreate what he had lost that he had nearly missed the beauty of what he had found. As Ethan's recovery progressed, Alexander found himself reevaluating other aspects of his life as well. He thought back to the corporate drama that had seemed so all-consuming just weeks ago. Now, it felt trivial in comparison to the joy of watching Ethan take his first steps post-surgery, or the pride he felt when Jessica aced an exam. He made the decision to step back permanently from the day-to-day operations of Rothschild Investments, focusing instead on using his wealth and influence for philanthropic efforts. He established a foundation in Ethan's name, dedicated to funding research into rare genetic disorders and supporting families facing similar challenges. This shift in priorities brought Alexander a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced in his years of corporate success. He found himself smiling more, laughing at Ethan's jokes, and genuinely enjoying the simple moments of family life. Jessica, too, underwent a transformation. The guilt and fear that had driven her deception gave way to a newfound confidence. She embraced her studies with a determination born of genuine passion rather than desperate need, and her relationship with both Alexander and Ethan deepened into something true and lasting. As for Ethan, the love and stability provided by both Alexander and Jessica seemed to have as much of a healing effect as any medical treatment. He blossomed under their care, his resilience and joy a constant reminder of why they had chosen to forge this unconventional family. One night, as they all sat together watching a movie, Ethan snuggled between them on the couch. Alexander caught Jessica's eye over Ethan's head. The look they shared was one of understanding, gratitude, and love. Not the fairy tale romance Alexander had once imagined, but something realer and ultimately more satisfying. In that moment, Alexander realized that he had finally found the happiness he had been searching for all along. It hadn't come in the package he expected, but it was all the more precious for the journey it had taken to reach it. The growth they had all undergone, from deception and mistrust to honesty and love, had transformed them in ways none of them could have anticipated. As they sat together, a family bonded by choice rather than just blood, Alexander knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger for the trials they had overcome. As summer turned to fall, the Rothschild household settled into a new rhythm. Ethan, now fully recovered, bounded through the house with an energy that belied his recent ordeal. Jessica, deep into her medical studies, often sat at the kitchen table surrounded by textbooks, with Ethan helping by quizzing her with flashcards. And Alexander, having found a new purpose in his philanthropic work, moved through his days with a contentment that surprised him. One crisp autumn evening, as they all sat on the balcony watching the sunset, Ethan asked a question that gave them all pause. "Are we a real family now?" Alexander and Jessica exchanged a look, years of complicated history passing between them in an instant. Then Alexander pulled Ethan onto his lap. "What makes a real family, buddy?" he asked gently. Ethan thought for a moment. "Love?" he ventured. and being there for each other? That's exactly right, Jessica said, reaching out to ruffle Ethan's hair. And by that definition, we're the realest family there is. As Ethan beamed at them both, Alexander reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a chance encounter born of deception, through trials and near tragedy, they had forged something beautiful and true. The themes that had defined their story, the power of forgiveness, the strength found in vulnerability, the ability of love to transcend conventional boundaries, all coalesced in this quiet family moment. Alexander realized that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or corporate success, but in the love and trust they had built together. Their family, unconventional as it was, stood as a testament to the idea that it's not the circumstances of our beginnings, but the choices we make and the love we share that define us. As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in brilliant hues, Alexander wrapped his arms around Ethan and Jessica, grateful for the unexpected twists of fate that had brought them together, and excited for the future they would build together.